What's up guys, in this video we're going to talk about npm axios module, which is based on promises, and it makes working with HTTP requests very easy. So let's see how we can use axios module to work with HTTP requests. So here we have a promise1.js file where we are first requiring the axios module, then we are doing an axios.get which will return a promise, and then we can call a then method on that which takes a onFulfilled function which will be called when the promise will be resolved. Now by default this promise will be resolved if this endpoint returns a status code of anything in between 200 to 299. If it returns a status code anything up about that range, that means that promise will be rejected, and in that case this function will not be called. So for currently our API returns a status code of 200 for this HTTP request, so it means our promise will be resolved and this function will be called. So let's just execute this file and see the output. So we're gonna execute node promise1.js. so it prints out the response object. If we are just interested in getting the data, we can use the response.data. So you can see there are a lot of properties on the response object. So if we have to just print the data, we can do response.data. Now if I execute this, we will just get the data from the response of the request. So in this case we didn't handle the error. So what if the promise is rejected? So if it returns a status code of 404, in that case that promise will be rejected, but we are not doing a error handling here. So we will do that in this one. So here we have added a catch where we specify our own rejection handle function. So this function will be called when this promise is rejected. Now in this case this promise will be rejected because we are not handling a rank of 42 on our backend. So let's execute this promise1 handling. So let's execute node promise1 handling. So we got our error which says record does not exist, and if you see up, so here is the error, request failed with a status code of 404. But if we make a request say for 5, ranking 5, in that case this function will be called because it will return a status code of 200. So if now we execute, we will not get the error. So we got our ranking and the country here. So by using axios we can remove that code. If you remember in the previous videos we were writing the code to get the promise, we were calling the get promise method, but in this case this axios.get will give us that promise, so we don't have to write that code to get the promise. So axios also have this axios.post, axios.put. So it's here axios.get, axios.delete, head and options and post and put and patch. So we can use axios with all these HTTP requests. So what if we try to change the default status code for resolving the promise? So we can do that. So here we have specified our status code range. So we want to resolve the promise even if it's 404. So anything that status code which is less than 500, then we want to resolve the promise. So even if we get a 404 in this case, because we have specified this validate status option in this object, we will resolve the promise, and in this case this function will be called. So let's execute this file and see. So let's clear out first and let's execute node custom error code range. So it was successful, so you will see there was no error in this case. So there was no error code, but the status was 404. But even though status was 404 but there was no error, we just didn't get any record any data from the response as the response. So here this is how we can specify a status code range for resolving the promise if we don't want the default status code range. And we can chain these promises as usual. So here we are chaining the promises. So first we are making a request to this endpoint, and if that promise is resolved, we are returning another promise, and on that promise, if that is resolved, we are returning another promise, and if that promise is resolved, then this function will be called, which means it will just print the data. So let's see, let's execute this one. So I will call this chaining promises one. So let's clear out node chaining promises.js. Okay, we are calling the for one, so that's why it just printed this error, because we don't have ranking 42 at the backend. Let's call the for one, and if we execute now, let's clear out first. So we got the medal 56. So first this request was fired, and then we returned these promises, which resulted in the ISO code for that country, Russia, which was RU. And from this promise we got the medal of Russia, which was 56, and then we printed it at the console. So that's what we did at this end. So this is how we can chain promises like we did before by using then. So this then returns a promise so that we can call a then function, and inside this then function we are returning another promise, so we can call the then function, and here we are just printing out the data. So, and if any error happens inside this request, then promise will be rejected, which will result in execution of this code. And we can do a lot more with error handling. So currently we are just printing here the error message, but in this case we can print out the data, the status and the headers. So if the error was with the response, we will print out this. If the error was with request, we will print out this, and if it was anything else, then we will print out this. So let's fire this one. So it's a chaining promises error handling. So node chaining promises error handling JS. So we get the data, so we get the response, and the data was undefined because record does not exist, because we are making a request to the ranking 42, which is not supported at the backend. So in this case, because our response, because this error happened because the promise was rejected because of the response code, so this error handling code was called, executed. But if there was a problem with the request itself, in that case this error handling code will execute. So if I stop the server and try to make a request, then in this case error.request will be there, and this will be printed out. So if now I try to make a request, oh gosh, okay, it's this one. So let's just clear out, and if I call it now, it just says error connection refused because it was not able to request to the server because we have stopped it. So let's just start it again. Node server.js. So this is how we can do error handling also for different cases. So by using axios module, it makes it very easy to work with HTTP requests and chain those HTTP requests. As we see here, the code is very less, and we didn't have to write the code to get a promise. So hope you find it helpful.